A strict and demanding father locks his daughter in a basement dungeon. She was locked in there for 24 years and had her father's babies. The movie, based on a true story, begins with a man named Don driving Sarah and her daughter Marie to the hospital. Marie has trouble breathing. While Don is carrying Marie in his arms, he forbids Sarah from talking to anyone there. Marie is immediately rushed to the ER, while Don and Sarah follow suit. Instead of saving her life, they only get a flat beep. The movie then flashes to a dinner scene 20 years before the incident. A family of 4, mother, father, and 2 daughters sit at a table and have dinner together. Sarah and Amy are laughing, and their mother Irene soon joins in. Their seemingly idyllic nature is broken by Don's authoritative attitude, who likes to keep his family in check. When Sarah asks permission to go to a party later that night, Don coldly dismisses the request and forbids her to go. Instead of listening to her father, Sarah sneaks out of the house later that night. Her boyfriend, Chris, is waiting close by on a motorcycle. The 2 of them ride off into the distance. When her parents go to check up on her later that night, they find her room empty. Her mother seems to be scared, wondering where their daughter is. But Don, her father, just says that Sarah is a problem. Sarah and Chris have a wonderful time together at the party. He even brought a guitar and sings for Sarah when they're all alone. After being out the entire night, Chris drops her off near her home. Unfortunately, Don sees the whole thing and confronts his daughter about it. The 2 have a verbal fight. In anger, Sarah tells her father that the day she turns 18 is the day she will leave the house and never return. While being grounded, her mother and sister come into Sarah's room and they talk about her plans to travel the US after graduation. Sarah tells both of them how she plans to support herself working small jobs all across the country. Unfortunately, while the girls are talking in Sarah's room, her father happens to walk past her bedroom door. He overhears the conversation and quickly goes to the basement. After pulling a wooden bookshelf, Don reveals the dungeon he's been working on in the basement. 3 months later, Sarah graduates high school. As soon as school ends and Sarah is alone in the house with her father, he asks her to help him carry a heavy box to the basement. Sarah doesn't want to do it, but she complies. After telling her to bring the box inside the secret room, Sarah is suspicious, but her father tells her that it is just a bomb shelter the previous owner built. She goes inside to carry the box, and as soon as she turns her back, Don locks the door, trapping her inside. Sarah tries to smash that like button just like you should do if you haven't done so already. But no, in all seriousness, she tries to scream for help, but to no avail. Don tells her that the dungeon is soundproof. Later that night, Irene is worried for her daughter's safety. She calls the police, but they can't seem to find her either. After spending 4 days in the basement, her father comes to check up on her, and Sarah assaults him. Pushing him aside, she manages to escape the first door, but Don locked the second one. Feeling defeated, Sarah returns to the dungeon, where Don tells her that from now on, she will have to work for everything she gets. But right before he is about to leave, Don takes advantage of his daughter. Meanwhile, all of this is going on downstairs. Irene and Amy are talking to a police officer. They are telling him about the details, and he assures them that they will do everything to find their daughter. While Sarah spends her days locked up in a dark dungeon, Chris comes by to check up on her. Don informs Chris that his daughter ran away from home without telling anyone. Chris refuses to believe him, but he can't do anything. Finally, Sarah's 18th birthday comes, and he brings his daughter a cake along with a provocative red dress. He tells her to wear the dress. When Sarah asks him for a clock, Don tells her that she will have to, quote-unquote, earn that. A year goes by, and Sarah is now pregnant, sweeping the floor of her dungeon. While sweeping, her water breaks, and she has to give birth all alone. She names the girl Marie, and for once in her life, she is happy. 4 years go by, and Sarah is pregnant again. Her mother and sister in the meantime never give up and keep looking for her. Don is frustrated that they don't give up the pursuit, so he storms off. Leading a double life, Don lives partly with his daughter Sarah in the dungeon and partly with his wife Irene upstairs. After Sarah gives birth to a baby boy named Michael, Don brings them a TV, their only connection to the outside world. Sarah turns her horrible fate into a fairy tale story, and she tells it to her children. Chris comes back, but this time he meets Amy. She tells him that they still haven't found Sarah. Later that night, while Don and Irene fight, Don drops his keys on the sofa. Amy takes them and goes to the basement. Don comes downstairs and yells at Amy. Meanwhile, Sarah and her 2 children invent games they play to pass the time. After giving birth to a boy named Thomas, Sarah smooth talks Don into taking Thomas upstairs. After he agrees, Sarah slips a little note inside the baby basket, hoping her mother will find it. Unfortunately, when Irene sees her daughter's baby at the front porch, she picks up the baby while Don picks up the note. He goes downstairs and assaults Sarah once again. Spending the last 14 years in the basement, Marie has grown into a beautiful teenage girl. Michael is scrawny and weak from the lack of food. When Don notices Marie's makeup and begins talking to her, Sarah snaps at him, wanting to protect her daughter from his vicious attacks. After the fight, Don cuts the power, which stops the supply of clean air to the dungeon. A lot of time has passed. Thomas is now all grown up. Sarah, Marie, and Michael noticed a leak in the ceiling. They immediately start clawing to get out, shining a flashlight at the neighborhood. One of the neighbors notices this, but instead of informing the cops, he tells Don. Don tells his neighbor to leave his house. Meanwhile, he goes downstairs to physically assault Sarah. This causes her painful contractions, and she gives birth to a stillborn. Don buries the baby in the backyard. If you enjoyed the video and want to see more, gently tap the subscribe button and get a thank you from our editors. After the incident, Marie and Michael confront Don when he will let them see the outside world. Don blames their quote-unquote disobedient mother for being trapped in the basement. The kids begin blaming her, and Sarah starts screaming and shouting. When she calms down, Sarah tells them the truth. Meanwhile, Don is fired and there's a foreclosure notice on his desk. As the problems keep mounting, Marie is sick and she can't breathe. Sarah begs him to take their daughter to the hospital. At first, he refuses, but realizing that he cannot bury a teenager in the yard, he complies. Sarah carries Marie to the car and Don drives. He instructs Sarah not to talk to anyone. While Don is filling out the paperwork, Sarah spills water on the copies. While Don goes to get new ones, Sarah separates from him and goes to the police officer in the hospital. She tells them everything, and the officer rushes towards Don to ask him questions. Don starts running away, but the officer catches and arrests him. Sarah tells Marie that they are finally free, and the police raid Don's house to find Michael. They carry him out on a stretcher as Don watches his web of lies unfold. Marie, Michael, and Thomas play in the yard, while Irene, Sarah, and Amy watch sitting on the porch. Then, a motorcycle pulls up to the house. The driver takes off his helmet, and Sarah is stunned. She sees Chris. They go for a walk, and Chris cries, apologizing for not trying harder to find her. He then gives her a pink helmet he promised for her 18th birthday, and they go on their long-awaited motorcycle ride.